Hey, welcome in, Buckeye fans and Buckeye haters alike. Whomever you enjoy following in college football, you are welcome here for Buckeyes Live each and every Wednesday, 11 a.m. Eastern Time. Tony Gerdeman down below. BuckeyeHuddle.com is the place to be, and Buckeye Weekly is the podcast as well. Steve's at Bucknuts247 Sports, of course, Steve Hellwagon, and Tony, I got to say, I just don't like the setup here. So let's do that. Let's get Tony right up here with us. Gentlemen, how are we doing today?
Doing great.
Good. Well, it's the season of rankings, and I will put in a plug for myself. All-time program rankings being released right now. We released the Pac-12 on Monday. Of course, Mark, why are you releasing Pac-12 all-time rankings? Well, wouldn't this be the best time to do it? It's all case closed. All the numbers are
the final rankings.
Final rankings. And we are working on the ACC. Hope to have those released today. And keep in mind, we are not spitballing this, folks.
Soon to be final rankings for the ACC. The way
Soon
that
to be
thing's
final
going.
rankings for the ACC. Probably put them down for one more season, maybe two. But not spitballing. We don't do that here at the Voice of College Football, folks. We're talking all-time winning percentage. We're looking at college football playoff era winning percentage, 21st century since 1970, NFL draft selections, first-round selections, conference championships. Get this one, Michigan fans. Conference championship percentage, meaning you can't win a conference when you don't play in the conference. Therefore, what is your percentage of conference championships? Also, we've got bowl wins, major bowl wins. We've got All-America selections, Heisman Trophy winners, all the major award selections on both sides of the ball, every position. And maybe I'm missing something, but we get to just about every conceivable angle. I would love to get to a strength of schedule, but that's way beyond my database. So that's where we stand.
Curious, Mark, where, and I don't want you to give it away, but with the ACC, where do Stanford, Cal, and SMU rank?
Well, we obviously included Stanford and Cal in the final Pac-12 rankings and have moved them over to the ACC as well. Of course, it's a awkward mix there and trying to determine what's what, but they were all achieved in major college football. So Stanford's got an interesting history, I will say that. They have plenty of peaks and valleys. They certainly do. And SMU, of course, has a distinction that no one else has in their history. So it's an interesting fit. And then the one awkward part of it in just about every conference, but probably least touches the SEC and the Big Ten because they've been fortified for so long, are these group of five entries. A Utah, much of their winning percentage built on group of five schedules, and of course conference championships and other leagues that aren't as significant. So it's not a perfect system by any stretch, but it's the best I could do. Meanwhile, we are focusing on 2024, folks, and many are out there putting together their post-spring top 25s, including, as was communicated to me before we started the live stream by Steve, Joel Klatt with his spring top 25. So I got to say, I'm not very aware of, nor do I delve into other people's top 25. So I'm not aware of Joel Klatt's. We will pull it up here in just a second, but Steve's got some thoughts on maybe the best in the business's top 25.
Yeah, I know you had Ohio State #1. I think Georgia 2, Texas 3. And after that, let me see, I had it in my chat last night. Exactly. I wrote, let me see.
Oregon 4, Ole Miss 5 is what I'm showing on our message board.
Okay. Yeah. Those are your top 5. And I think, pretty representative groups. I think Alabama checks in there in the top 10 somewhere. Michigan and Penn State might be in the top 12. Nebraska and Iowa are in the top 25 down toward the bottom. I'm at a loss. Well, USC's got to be in the top 10 as well.
I've got it right here.
Okay.
So yeah, Michigan is 8, Penn State is 9, USC is 15.
Welcome to the Big Ten.
Welcome to the Big Ten. And Nebraska 22, the Dylan Raiola bounce, Iowa 24, another Big Ten team. And that looks like it's
Yeah.
for the Big Ten. Future Big Ten team, Florida State, number 12.
There you go. They're all, anybody who's not in the SEC or the Big Ten now is future SEC or future Big Ten, it feels like, but we digress. My major misgiving with Ohio State has been the offensive line. And Dave Biddle and myself did a deep dive on the offensive line today. And maybe I'm coming around a little bit on it. 4 of the 5 spots seem to be etched in stone with Josh Simmons at left tackle, Donovan Jackson left guard, Seth McLaughlin at the center position, and Josh Fryer about 94% certain to be the right tackle. They could be scouring the transfer portal to find a starter, a 5th starter for this group. The right guard position seems a little bit problematic with Carson Hinsman, who started at center last year, kind of ended up the spring there, along with Ryan Montgomery and Tegritash Bola, who also reps at tackle. So if they find a tackle in the transfer portal, maybe Fryer would move inside to guard, or if they find a guard, then that person could compete with those other ones for the guard position. And, so what? If they don't have the Joe Moore award-winning offensive line. I did research here on this as we were coming on the air. And did you know Ohio State won the national championship in 2002 and 2014 without benefit of very many National Football League offensive linemen? I can read to you the starting offensive lines for those 2 teams. 2002, Ivan Douglas and Shane Olivier at tackle, Adrian Clark and Bryce Bishop at guard, and Alex Stepanovich at center. And of those 5, I think only Alex Stepanovich played appreciable time in the National Football League. I guess Shane Olivier did as well, just a little bit. But I don't think Douglas, Clark, or Bishop ever played much or at all in the National Football League. And then you fast forward to 2014, and the starters were Taylor Decker and Darrell Baldwin at the tackle positions. Decker still playing in the NFL a decade later with the Lions. I guess he'd be was he a senior that year? A 9-year vet. And then Billy Price, who did bounce around the NFL for a few years, and Pat Elflein at the guards. Tony, is Pat still in the NFL?
Oh, I don't know. I'm sure he's trying to hang on, but it never really clicked for him.
Yeah, never really clicked. And then Jacoby Boren, who was never an NFL prospect either. So out of those 2 offensive lines, you've got 3, maybe 4 guys who made NFL careers out of playing on the offensive line. So maybe my major misgiving, and I'm not saying you can hide a bad offensive line. I'm not saying Ohio State's got a bad offensive line, but you can win it without having All-Americans at all 5 positions, I guess. So, and that may be what Ohio State has to do. And that may very well be what Ohio State goes out and does this coming season, because, it didn't look and feel a whole lot better this spring than it did last spring. But then again, some of that could be we saw a lot more of the backups out there at critical times, and the older guys were kind of kept out because they'd had that rep club exemption. They'd done so much already that there was like Donovan Jackson. What's he got to prove? Seth McLaughlin, he could snap the ball. Okay, grab a ball cap and go over there, So, it wasn't necessary for those guys to be out there grinding 70 plays a day in practice. So, and then maybe some breakdowns with the backups. But I do like 7 or 8 guys deep on this offensive line. I just want to see it. And I think this is a situation where we'll get into mid-October when the bullets really start flying for this team, and the challenges after the Michigan State game start becoming real, that that we'll have a better idea what this offensive line can do.
I go back to that 2002 where Rob Sims and Nick Mangold as freshmen really started to
Yep.
play and bolster that line and made it better.
They both played more in the NFL than anybody who started on that team.
Yeah.
Ahead of them.
And then with, compared to last spring, we've said it before, and the last year when they left spring, it was Josh Fryer at left tackle, Zen Mihalski at right tackle, and Carson Hinsman battling Vic Cutler to be your center. So like it's a world of difference between now and then, in my opinion. And as we talked about last week or the week before, there's nobody out there in the portal on the offensive line. So you're going to bring in another Vic Cutler type if you're going to bring somebody in, unless a graduate jumps in. I don't even know if a graduate can jump in at this point any longer, but there's been no mention of hosting offensive linemen at this point. So I'm of the opinion that they feel good enough, certainly better than they did a year ago when they're trying to find three guys and one of them is going to be a brand new center. So you're just, if you go into every year just trying to find the right guard, an offensive line coach will take it 10 times out of 10. The head coach will take that every single year. If that's all you're worried about, and you've got 3 or 4 guys that could start there any given year, that's not really, they've had bigger problems than that. So I think they're going to be okay there. And, there's just, I could scroll through, and we talked about it last week, the top offensive linemen that could help we're in like the 460s and 480s, and the top offensive lineman in the portal a week or two ago was a true freshman, and that's not what you're looking for because Ohio State has 4 of them.
Yeah, not to excuse their issues along the offensive line or excuse their lack of recruiting up front or their player acquisition, but hardly anyone is ever satisfied with their offensive line. If you look at media coverage across the country and dissecting offensive lines, hardly anyone is ever pleased with or believes that they don't have issues along the offensive line. That said, I understand your point, Steve, in recent weeks about getting by with a, let's say, better than mediocre, decent offensive line. I don't know whether I agree with that or I disagree with that, so I'm not going to argue it because I don't necessarily disagree with it, but I don't necessarily agree with it either. I would have to do a lot of digging because when I think best offensive lines in the country, and this is very anecdotal and it's very reputation based and not grinding down to the actual personnel on the field recently, but Georgia's had exemplary offensive lines recently for the most part. Alabama, of course, produces the most NFL offensive linemen. Wisconsin has in the past, right there with Alabama. Clemson's been able to, during their 2015 to 2020 run, get by with those decent offensive lines. So there you go, with tremendous running back, wide receiver, and quarterback play. Clemson's been an exception to, again, not a great offensive line, not NFL players for the most part, and been able to compete for championships on a regular basis. Of course, our friends to the north rode an offensive line more in 2021 and 22. They had issues at a particular position with Barnhart late in the season that they fixed and mended going into the playoff, and that's what they rode to the championship. And they faced a team in Washington that apparently had the best offensive line in the country. They won the award for such. I don't know that that was the case. Yeah, all that offensive talent is going to make up for an offensive line, and the play calling is going to make up for the offensive line if your play caller knows what he's doing. And this guy has quite a bit of experience in that realm. But at the same time, it would sure be nice if the quarterback can stand back there and pat the football, and the running backs have nice big lanes to run through, especially a Travion Henderson.
I would argue the last 2 national champions did not have – they had as good of an offensive line as Ohio State will have this year. I don't think Georgia, from talking to people, there were issues, but they were able to get away with it. And Stetson Bennett was outstanding and feeling the pocket and escaping the pocket and making things happen. So I think you don't need the best offensive line to win it all, you just need to be better than the defensive line that you're facing that day. And not even the entire time, just enough. And I think Ohio State has a good enough offensive line. If that's, like I said, if that's their biggest concern, and right now it might be maybe linebacker, I don't know. But they've got more options than they've had in the past, more options than they had in 2002 and 2014 when you're putting Darryl Baldwin, a former defensive lineman, at right tackle, and they had to do it the next year with Chase Ferris as well. So like it's been things have improved greatly, even if it doesn't look like it at the time.
So Tony, I'll ask you this, and I'll ask Steve to follow up on the same question. What would be your list of why Ohio State did not win a national championship last year, whether that list is 17 items long or 1 item long?
Offensive line and Kyle McCord, some accuracy issues and inability to run the ball. I think the lack of quarterback run, and not running 15 times a game like JT Barrett, the lack of a running threat, the offensive line wasn't good enough to handle that. And I don't know if the running backs were good enough, because you look at the fact that Mayan Williams is not anywhere in camp, I don't think, still yet. And injuries have a lot to do with that. Surgery has a lot to do with that. But this is when you're relying on a former linebacker, former running back, and Chip Trayanum, Xavier Johnson, like this was not an overly talented running back room, not an overly talented offensive line. And then you go in with a quarterback who is not going to contribute to the running game at all. You can get away with that when you've got CJ Stroud, but he didn't win any national championships either. So I think the defense did everything it could to win it last year. The quarterback situation, the lack of a running game, basically the entire offense, and losing Emeka hurt as well. And that kind of forced Kyle McCord to lock in more on Marvin Harrison, I think.
Yeah, I agree with everything Tony said. I think, Michigan was able to exploit a few things. I mean, against Ohio State's defense that maybe nobody else was able to do. But ultimately, I think the offense struggled in that game for so long, and it was just such a slog, I thought, for the offense. I mean, they just never were able. It didn't feel like that when they had to get 2 yards, they could line up and get 2 yards. And if you can't do that, you're not going to win at the highest level in college football. So, I think it was just a very difficult season. You had a rookie coordinator, a rookie quarterback, patchwork. I don't say patchwork, just kind of an offensive line, kind of thrown out there, and you lose. Buka was out half the year, so it just it was a tough go for the offense last year, I think.
And I think, Tony, in addition to what you said about McCord's inaccuracy, you would agree, because we talked about it so many times last year, his inability to see open receivers and pull the trigger.
Yeah, the anticipation, throwing guys open, it wasn't there. And when he did, the accuracy wasn't necessarily there either. And so, things were a little bit late, or a lot late, and just never really ever looked fluid. And you could see it, the frustration in Ryan Day on the sideline. You can see it after the game, during the week, where he's doing everything he can to get this offense going, and it's just not. And they scored, I don't know, something a little over 30 points a game last year. It was the first time in Ryan Day's tenure that they were under 40 points a game. And it's just unheard of. It used to be unheard of for Ohio State to score 40 points a game for an entire season. They'd only done it like 3 or 4 times before Urban Meyer got there, and then Ryan Day was doing it every year. until last year. And so, they've had situations where they couldn't run the ball before, like in 2018, they couldn't run the ball, but they still scored a heck of a lot of points, and they did not have great defenses. Last year they had a really good defense, and held teams to 3 and outs and got the ball back, but they still couldn't do anything with it. And so, a lot of that's going to go on Kyle McCord. And somebody else mentioned, and Brian Hartline as the offensive coordinator. Let's not forget losing Kevin Wilson was an impactful thing as well, when the eyes in the sky have changed, and Ryan Day is maybe doing a bit more than he had to in the past. And still, you could have gotten away with that with like a CJ Stroud, but to use him as an example is kind of, he's the outlier of all outliers, as we're seeing in the NFL. But they just didn't get enough out of the quarterback position. And this year, I wonder if that's all they need to get out of the quarterback position, because in terms of the throwing game, because the quarterback this year will be more of a running threat. So if we look at Kyle McCord's stats from last year, as I pull them up really quickly, and great radio right here. But McCord throws for 3,170 yards, 24 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. I think you take that right now from Will Howard, because the running game is going to be better. So there's that's a very it's a very Justin Fields kind of number in 2019, when he threw for 3,273 yards in one more game, but he did have 41 touchdown passes.
That's the number that I think needs to be better. I think Will Howard needs to throw more than 24 touchdown passes for this team to win a national championship.
I wouldn't disagree with you there. 24 is a pretty low number, and it's completely out of the ordinary for what Ryan Day has done. But he's also been very confident in his quarterbacks to throw from the 1, the 2, the 3 yard line, and you get some cheapies that way. And there was that confidence wasn't there last year.
Yakov is getting into the spirit of off-season rankings, and so he wants to go the running back route. Yakov, we appreciate you being here as always. Top 5 Ohio State running backs in 40 years. So you're taking us back to 1980, roughly.
And this is Ohio high school running backs we're talking about? That's how I viewed it.
Yeah, it may be, actually, because all of those guys between Robert Smith, Beanie Wells, Maurice Claret, that is 3 of his selections right there.
Do you have to throw Ricky Powers in there? Him and Robert Smith were the top 2 guys in the nation that year. But I'm like racking my brain over some of these other guys over the years. And Steve, you put together the list of the recruiting classes from the past 30 years, and nobody really jumps out.
I really have to rack my brain and think about this. I mean, there have been some guys that have put up some outrageous numbers, like Maurice Hall, who played for the Buckeyes, was over 2,000 yards at Brookhaven, maybe in a season. I don't know, just some obscene numbers of yards.
Kajana Carter.
Who's that?
Kajana Carter.
Kajana Carter would definitely be up there as one of the top, at least recruiting running backs. I mean, my God, he went top 5 in the NFL draft, didn't he, to the Bengals? I mean, that
would go number 1?
Maybe number 1, and blew his knee out, never made it. But I could do some research on this and get back to you. But man, there have been some good ones, no doubt. I mean, Brandon Sane was a big deal when he came out of high school. Boom Herron was a big deal. Man, this is
Curtis Enos, as somebody mentions.
Oh, yes, Enos. My goodness.
He's Mr. Football.
Yeah, very prolific running back, and went on to the NFL even, from Penn State. But I'd have to sit down and think about this one. This is a good one. Some of the all-timers. But yeah, the 3 that he mentioned are up there with anybody. 40,
I like
40 years back to 84. So
yeah. Where does so that's
Carlos
that-
Snow, yes, my God, like 7,000 career yards at Cape or whatever that was, some obscene number of yards.
there's the one I wanted to mention. Javon Ringer was fantastic.
Tyrell
He had
Sutton
knee
was a good
issues.
player.
Tyrell Sutton was a good one, and
Yeah.
he hit Northwestern running, and he rushed for like 1,400 yards as a true freshman.
Yeah.
So yeah, some blasts from the past. Javon Ringer was a guy that I wanted Ohio State to sign, but I think of the grades and knee issues that held him out. But he was a workhorse for a little bit, and I think D'Antonio kind of ran him into dust. Again, like
Didn't Chuck Webb, was he from Toledo? Went to Tennessee.
Chuck Webb, Macumber, I believe, same
Yeah.
high school as Jim Jackson. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Kareem Hunt. Yeah,
David
obviously.
Montgomery.
Le'Veon Bell from Groveport. Played at Michigan State. Yeah.
Boy, some of these names from the past, the Rod Farver, Cooper Tick, Kelton Lindsey over Ryan Brewer. There's another name, Kelton Lindsey. Every year there'd be like 2 or 3 running backs back in the 90s that Ohio State would sign, like a Sean Penny or a all of these different guys. And you're like, oh, this guy's the next one, and they rarely were. But who was there's maybe it was Kelton Lindsey, but one of the top guys from the Cincinnati area ended up getting in trouble and then transferring to Cincinnati and did okay. But I like Antonio Pittman.
Lebanon. Shane Wynn was from down in Cincinnati. He was a big deal. There's a lot of them over the years. Mr. Simpson, Deshaun Wynn. Winton Woods had a good running back. I'm blanking on the name. So there's been a lot of them. I just have to get out the record book, look at the Mr. Football list. I'm sure that a bunch of names would come back to me, but
one a late one, Drushawn Humphrey was a guy that's going to be part of that 2002 Ohio State class from Toledo that everybody loved, and died of a heart defect, I believe, and was a guy that was going to be part of the same class with Maurice Claret, and those two were supposed to be that was going to be impressive, and unfortunately for Humphrey and his family and all of that, it never came to be, and he passed away. But he was another high school legend of some note.
No doubt.
Yeah, that's quite a list of names. Brings back a lot of memories. I got to say, though, I moved out of the state of Ohio in 1994, and my attachment to Ohio high school football after that was next to zero, living 500 miles away. So I couldn't differentiate who was in the state of Ohio and who wasn't, for the most part. Some of those guys I recall.
Cade Stover was a heck of a running back. Ralph Wolf mentioning Charles Woodson, who was a running back recruit as well.
Yep.
But a middling cornerback as well.
Yeah. Well, only 15 years in the NFL.
Punters do that.
All right, folks. Appreciate you being here at the Voice of College Football. And leave those comments and questions there in the chat. We appreciate the super chat contributions, of course, to carry us on through the off season. Hey, while we're hitting on Ohio running backs, we'll switch it up, positions and focus here. As Steve has mentioned, Marvin Harrison Jr., of course, with a historic selection in the NFL draft out of the wide receiver position for Ohio State. The Buckeyes discovered the forward pass roughly about 40 years ago as well. So, Steve, we'll let you lead it off in regards to your list of all-time running backs, or at least get the conversation started.
Now, we're talking running backs. Is that what we're doing?
I'm sorry, wide receivers. Yes.
Yeah, this came up. I did a radio show out in Phoenix, and the host is a friend of mine who's got a working knowledge of Ohio State football. And, Ohio State now has the record with 12 all-time first-round wide receivers in the NFL draft. They were tied with Tennessee with 11. And then Marvin Harrison Jr. a week or two ago became the 12th all-time in OSU history. And the first one is a little bit of a misnomer. The first one was Paul Warfield back in the 1960s. I think he was drafted by Miami Dolphins first and then later played with the Browns. But he was primarily like a running back for Woody Hayes, I believe. Did catch some passes, obviously, and that's what he ultimately did as a pro. But Ohio State would not have another first-round pick at wide receiver until Joey Galloway, I believe, in 95, and then Terry Glenn the following year in 96. So Chris Carter was not a first-round pick in the 80s because he missed the draft and then was declared ineligible by the NCAA for taking extra benefits for 87 season and declared for the supplemental draft. And Philadelphia, I think I could sit here and spend 20 minutes explaining how they did the supplemental draft last year, but Philadelphia got him in the supplemental draft and lost a third-round pick, I believe, in the following year's draft to take him in the supplemental draft, I believe is how that works, something to that nature. So Chris Carter, one of the all-time greats in NFL, Pro Football Hall of Famer, and an All-American at Ohio State, was not a first-round pick. But 12 all-time first-round picks, so that's one category you could look at. I just, in the time we've been on the air here, scratched down all of the first-team all Big Ten wide receivers, beginning with Doug Donnelly in the late 70s, playing with Arch Leister. He was all Big Ten twice. Chris Carter was all Big Ten twice. David Boston was all Big Ten twice. Olave twice, and Marvin Harrison Jr. twice, and that's it. Marvin Harrison Jr. is the only Ohio State wide receiver to be a first-team All-American twice. And the other first-team All-Americans at wide receiver are Chris Carter, Terry Glenn, who won the Biletnikoff Award, Boston, Ted Ginn Jr., primarily as a punt returner. In fact, I think almost entirely as a punt returner. Curtis Samuel was kind of the all-purpose guy, H-back, wide receiver, but he caught like 80 passes that year in 2016. Then Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson each were one-time first-team All-Americans, and Harrison twice, and Harrison also won the Biletnikoff Award. So I think I'm going to write a column about this on Bucknuts at some point and declare a top 10 list just to show how impressive, or it should be a top 20 list is what it ought to be, just to show how impressive. I mean, you got guys like Michael Jenkins who, probably can't even scratch the top 10, and he was outstanding. I mean, he was on a national championship team. Jeff Graham was an all Big Ten player for the Buckeyes. Santonio Holmes did it once, and Anthony Gonzalez. Michael Thomas was never a first-team all Big Ten player, which is interesting. So you can look at production. You can look at catches. You can look at average yards per catch. You can look at touchdowns. You could look at years that they started, years that they were all Big Ten, NFL draft, All-American, awards. I mean, there's 8 or 10 different criteria right there where we can judge all these guys. And, hands, route runner, the guys who excelled at the hard-to-make catch. Chris Carter, you call them acrobats. Chris Carter could catch, if you threw it anywhere in his vicinity, he caught it. I think Santonio Holmes, that catch he had in the Super Bowl, kind of illustrates the one that won the Super Bowl for Pittsburgh, illustrates the same type of ability. He caught 2 passes in the Kansas State Fiesta Bowl when he was a sophomore, where he's going out of bounds and basically runs into the wall. And Krenzel, or whoever the quarterback, put it perfectly, just boom, boom, 1 foot in, hit the wall, basically. So, I mean, he was amazing. And so there's just been so many. Oh my God, the catch that Wilson had, against Clemson as a freshman, was nothing short of amazing. So I think it was Clemson. I don't know. I remember all the games run together. I think it was the Clemson game. So yeah, you just have so many that you look at there, and I don't know. Olave is way up there on all the career lists. He started for 3.5 seasons, at Ohio State. That's pretty good. Rarely do guys do that because they leave to go to the NFL, but he stuck around for one last year. But I don't know, just that's some parameter and some thought. I'm sure everybody out there has their top 3 list, but I have a hard time not putting Harrison, certainly in the top 2 or top 3, but man, you're going to make some people angry if you leave anybody off that list.
Well, a couple of weeks ago on the Buckeye Weekly podcast, we drafted, Tom and I, against each other. Basically, you drafted four receivers, 4 Ohio State receivers from the past to face 5 defensive backs, Ohio State defensive backs from the past, 2 corners, a nickel, 2 safeties. And so we each drafted 4 receivers, and I can give you the order that these receivers went, and the names that are left off the list are pretty ridiculous. But so Marv went, he was the first receiver taken. He went number 2 overall. I went with Terry Glenn as my first receiver at number 5, and then Chris Carter went, and then Garrett Wilson went with the 4th receiver, Jackson Smith and Jigba as the 5th, David Boston as the 6th, Ted Ginn Jr. as the 7th, Santonio Holmes as the 8th. No Michael Jenkins, no Chris Olave, no.
Are they going to punt the ball in this game? Because then I would definitely want to. No, this is just strictly.
Yeah. So, like, Curtis Samuel, no Michael Thomas, no Devin Smith. I mean, if you want to win, just throw Devin Smith a touchdown. You never lost when he caught a touchdown. But that's just 8 guys. And the names of the corners that are left off the list are pretty ridiculous as well. But I think Santonio Holmes is one of the most underrated receivers in Ohio State history. He can play anywhere. He would do fantastically well in Ryan Day's system. I think Joey Galloway, it's tragic. He was born 30 years too soon, being stuck in the early 90s of the Ohio State passing game when you run a 4.2 and you bench 350, 400 pounds and could do all that stuff. So he was born too soon, and he's not, another guy that's not on this list. I think he was the number 8 or 9 pick of the Seattle Seahawks way back when. But I would go Marv, and David Boston was always my number 1 all-time Ohio State receiver. After his junior year, it used to be Chris Carter, the best hands I ever saw at Ohio State. Garrett Wilson, I think, can play in any era and be a number 1 receiver with any team. So I might just go, like, if I'm picking 4, go Marv, Garrett Wilson. It's so difficult. Terry Glenn had one fantastic season, but was as good an individual season as any Ohio State player has ever had at any position. Chris Carter's a Pro Football Hall of Famer, so, like, not that matters, but that's how good he was. And to leave him off the list, I think, would probably be wrong. So I'm going to abstain, basically.
Yeah, it's a tough one. What's interesting is for Galloway, he played primarily 92, 93, 94. And I mean, Jeff Graham had done some nice things before that, and Chris Carter in the 80s, and Donnelly before him, and maybe 1 or 2 other guys. But, Galloway in the modern era, basically from 90 on, he kind of got the run started, so to speak. Anybody before that was kind of a one-off. And Mike Lanise would be on this list as a guy on the hard-to-catch passes as well. I mean, he made one against Michigan where he laid out to help them, I think, in 84, beat Michigan, I believe. So what I was going to say, and this is a comment that stuck with me all these many years later, is they brought in Walt Harris in 1995 to basically coach the quarterbacks and Joe Hollis was still the offensive coordinator, and Mike Jacobs was the offensive line coach. And that's when the offense kind of really began to hit its stride. And Harris was only there 2 seasons. He was there in 95 and 96. 95 with Bobby Huang as the quarterback, and 96 with Joe Germain and Stanley Jackson splitting time at quarterback. And the numbers that they put up in those 2 years were phenomenal. The remark that Walt Harris said is, it's too bad I only got to work with Bobby Huang for 1 year, because he's obviously got a lot of talent, and we could have really done something if we'd had a couple, 2-3 years together. I mean, in 95 was outstanding, obviously, but just imagine, to have 2 or 3 years of that type of production. 94 was just kind of 2 steps forward, 3 steps back, 2 steps forward, 3 steps back type season for Ohio State, really, getting killed by Penn State, everything else. But I think they got, I want to say they got killed at Washington, maybe, or they lost at Washington. Didn't get blown out, but they lost like by 2 touchdowns or something early that season at Washington as well. So, and Terry Glenn Joey Galloway was playing in the 93-94 Ohio State offense. Put Joey Galloway in the 95 offense, and his numbers look a lot like what Terry Glenn produced in 95, which was maybe the greatest single season anybody's ever had. That's another criteria, is who had, that you throw in there, okay, of all these guys, rate them on who had the single best season in OSU history, is another criteria, for overall best wide receiver. And Terry Glenn has to be one of the top 2 seasons or 3 seasons in production in OSU history, obviously in 95. So, but it's kind of like the Mike Conley 1 season versus Aaron Kraft 4 season argument at point guard, and Mike Conley played in the national championship game where Aaron Kraft only played in, a Final Four. But how do we weigh this? How does 1 equate to 4? No, it really doesn't. So, but the guy who only played 1 season is playing 15 years in the NBA, and the guy who played 4 seasons is now a doctor, so how do we rate this? So apples and oranges comparisons over eras and times.
To underline a few of those points and spotlight a few of those notes, I'll go back to Paul Warfield just to say again, he was not utilized as a wide receiver for the most part under Woody Hayes, and then he wins 2 Super Bowls with the Dolphins, plays in 3, and was one of the kind of early selections, Lance Allworth, that era, as one of the greatest of all time with the Dolphins, although his reps and targets with the Dolphins pretty limited back in those days compared to what we see today. I'm going to mention a running mate of Doug Donnelly. Right before it was Lanise and Carter, it was Gary Anderson and Doug Donnelly, and Anderson was a deep threat with Donnelly and a pretty integral for the Buckeyes there in the late 70s, the Rose Bowl run in 1980. But Joey Galloway, my goodness, it was similar to Ted Ginn, watching this guy run in his late 30s in the NFL and still being incredibly productive and just rocket fast in his late 30s. Just a freak, just a complete freak how good Joey Galloway was. And it's a shame that he was in those antiquated offenses at the time.
At least Ted Ginn got to play in the 2006, play with Troy Smith that year, because he was kind of underutilized as well throughout his career, especially as a freshman when he's doing his most impact in the return game. But I think he had 25 catches as a true freshman, and probably should have had double that.
But they started to get it going there in 05 with Troy Smith, Gonzalez, Santonio Holmes, and was Holmes there?
Yep.
Yes.
And Ted Ginn Jr. And after one of the games, Clay Hall, who just retired as the Channel 6 sports anchor, being replaced by Dave Holmes, who's moving over from Channel 10. I think today is his first day on the job at Channel 6, and he'll probably be preempted by weather again tonight, just as they were last night. But at any rate, Clay Hall asks Jim Tressel during a post-game press conference, can we call them the Fun Bunch? And Tressel's like, oh, Clay, no. He didn't like that. He never wanted to have, anybody put on a pedestal above anybody else. He wanted it all to be Ohio State, that type of thing. We don't want to create, a caste system where, heaven forbid, we call a group of players the Fun Bunch and make it fun, but, oh, no, Clay, no. It was kind of Tressel's reply to that.
We've named 25 guys, and Anthony Gonzalez just got named. You talk about a gamer. My goodness, him making some great catches. The great catch against Michigan.
Yes, Michigan. Yeah.
On the final drive. Absolutely.
I saw him in the elevator at a game this past year. He was in the House of Representatives, I think only for one term out of the Cleveland area. And I said, you tried. Thanks anyway, whatever. He did not run for re-election. He was on the wrong side of the power people, I guess.
Absolutely. The great receiver that never was that I thought was going to be was Chris Vance. I thought he was going to be outstanding.
Yeah.
And
he was a JUCO guy. Contributed a little bit. I would also throw Chris Gamble in there. I don't know whatever happened to that guy.
Yeah. Not heavy in terms of catches, just because Krenzel, wasn't prolific like that. But when he made plays, they were huge. And obviously this doesn't talk about him at wide receiver, but Andre Johnson, wasn't it, from Miami? Is that the guy? Was like, and he had a huge NFL career for years, and then was an All-American at Miami, et cetera, so on. And I think in that championship game had 5 catches for like 55 yards or something. Like, Gamble put him on lock. Of course, the pass rush, nobody, and Dorsey, after he got murdered there in the first quarter, 2-3 sacks in the first quarter, he was never the same, I don't think, after that. So that kind of turned that game a little sideways, I think. And here we are, 21 and a half years later, and that program still hasn't recovered from that. So from that ass beating.
This is going to be the year. This is going to be the year.
They should be in the playoffs this year. The schedule is very easy. They've got talent. They just need to make it happen. And Miami should absolutely be in the playoffs this year. If they're not, it's not a fireable offense, but just very disappointing if they don't do it. Would you agree, Mark? Do you think they're there?
They should be. They've got the best quarterback in the conference, if not beyond that. They've loaded up at running back with Damian Martinez coming in as an all Pac-12 performer to put together with Mark Fletcher, one-time Ohio State commit. Xavier Restrepo might be the best wide receiver, certainly in the slot in the conference, if not the country. Absolutely. They should be ready they don't play Clemson. They don't play North Carolina State this year.
Are they done with divisions?
They are done with the divisions.
Good. I never had to learn.
What's the SEC going to do? Are they doing divisions, East and West? And how does that? They are
done with divisions.
They're done too?
They've gone back and forth so many times, I can't remember where they landed. But they're done with divisions. But in terms of the where they landed on how they're going to, they only released a 24 and 25 schedule, and they're still trying to figure out what they're going to do long term.
Does Texas get to play Texas A&M?
Yes.
Wow. Good for them. Bringing it back.
Yeah, I think they're going with the permanent opponent concept as well.
Yeah, you have to. I mean, my God. I mean, a lot of those teams have played each other, since the early 1900s. So, yeah, that's how it should be. I mean, when you really look at it, Alabama's got to play Auburn. Texas got to play Oklahoma and Texas A&M. I mean, that's how it's got to be.
We should note before we wrap up on the wide receivers that the last edition under Urban Meyer with Dwayne Haskins at quarterback was a good bunch, and obviously Terry McLaurin in particular
Yes,
has parlayed that into an excellent NFL start.
no doubt.
I don't know that anybody saw that for him. And again, he didn't have his first catch as a Buckeye until his third year. And I think he had like 11 catches that year as a redshirt sophomore. And just a guy that you can absolutely root for, and has done it the right way and has worked for everything he's gotten. And you would just hope that maybe Washington can get him a quarterback one of these days. I think they have.
And another name that everyone knows because of coaching as well, even outside the Ohio State camp, is probably the guy that had the most NFL productivity compared to least college productivity, and that's Brian Hartline.
1,000-yard receiver a couple times with the Dolphins, and
Yeah, if I write this and leave him off the list, he's going to be pissed at me. I know that. He'll say something.
Great stuff. Folks, we appreciate you being here.
I think it goes without saying he's the best wide receivers coach they've ever had. I don't even know who else would be on that list because they didn't have wide receivers till the 90s. So it's kind of like, I mean, who have been the wide receivers coaches here? Was Chuck Stobart a wide receivers coach for a while? And then
was he quarterbacks or receivers?
He was quarterbacks. Maybe he wasn't wide. I think he was wide receivers for a while, and then he went to quarterbacks, I think. Who've been the wide receivers coaches here? Daryl Hazel was
Daryl
good.
Hazel.
Daryl Hazel was good in the 2000s. And then
the guy who left, Stan Drayton, was there.
Zach Smith did it the first few years under Urban, obviously. And he turned that unit around. I mean, from what they had when Urban got there, Urban didn't like it. Obviously,
the clown show.
The clown show, yeah, they didn't like it the first year, and then Zach was part of turning it around at least.
Absolutely. I still remember the John Gruden sit down with Terrell Pryor when he used to do the quarterback evaluations and look at the film and have him draw up plays. And John Gruden went on and on about Dane Sanzenbacher.
Yep. He was an all Big Ten guy one year.
He's like, if that kid doesn't get drafted, there's something wrong.
I think he might have been the team MVP in 2010, maybe, when they won 12 games. So, yeah, he was great. He was a good player.
Did they win 12 games? I don't think they're getting credit for that.
In my book, they won 12 games. If they're giving Reggie Bush back his Heisman, they need to give Tressel back his stuff, give Pryor back his stuff.
Right on.
There's no reason if Pryor's up for this and wants to be a man about town, there's no reason why. I think he's quietly living in existence elsewhere. I think right now, probably in the Pittsburgh area. If he wants to be around Ohio State's program, I think everything that kid went through, I think he could only be it depends what kind of state of mind, state of life he's in right now. If he wants to be like, a guy that could help people, because, and this is something very interesting. You guys, Tony, you mentioned Kevin and Mark Givler from your site are on the Southern Swing right now. And we're going to hit camps and combines and all this stuff. OSU will have its summer camp coming up in a month there. And I go to a lot of basketball stuff. And it's really interesting when you think about this, how NIL and these payments from collectives have changed the complexion of college athletics. You're not only now just trying out to get a scholarship at one of these places, you're also now trying out to potentially, and again, it's not like USA Today where they're going to print the the salary of all 85 Ohio State scholarship players on opening day like they do for Major League Baseball. But you're trying out for a $50,000 to $100,000 a year job. You know, with everything you do now as a high school kid, I mean, for 4 years you could go in and make $200,000 to $500,000 playing, or more, hell, much more, playing college football or college basketball. And I think that hasn't. I think they know it's out there, but I don't think people have amended their behavior to understand exactly what's out there for them if they dot all their I's and cross all their T's. You know, if they work out, you know, and put themselves in the position to be the best in their class, they can write their own ticket, basically, beyond being able to write their own ticket. So that's kind of a thing that's out there now for these high school kids. And I don't think they've fully grasped it or accepted it yet. I go to these events, I still see a lot of petulant behavior, and I'm like, sorry, bro, I ain't giving you $1 million. You know, you ain't coming to my school, you know? So the coach still has some power in that regard.
Steve, what's going on with you these days?
You know, this May thing, on one hand, I'm enjoying a little bit of the downtime, but on the other hand, we still have so much work that we're trying to get done. And I was able to get away to Myrtle Beach this past weekend for a golf outing with a friend of mine down there. And that was a lot of fun. And I'm more of a Hilton Head person, going to Hilton Head in June for a week. But I am coming around a little bit on Myrtle Beach. There are some very nice areas in Myrtle Beach that are worthwhile for checking out. So, you know, I guess I kind of taught me you need to be open to new frontiers. And if you're a golf person, there's all kinds of places to play down there. So that was good this past week in terms of Ohio State stuff. This is kind of a quiet time. Coaches are out on the road recruiting, and they just had graduation this past week. More players received degrees, and they'll probably be, I don't know, 15 guys on the roster who will have their degrees going into this year, if not more. And that's kind of a neat thing as well.
Tony, what's going on with you?
Well, unlike Steve, I did not go to Ohio's summer capital, Myrtle Beach. Not yet, anyway. We just dropped a podcast yesterday, Buckeye Weekly podcast, trying to predict and reason away all 12 of the kickoff times for Ohio State and networks, which was it's an arduous process, but it's not an arduous show. It might be, I don't know, but we tried to put that together. So, because people are always asking about this game or that game. And so we just, you know what, let's run through it, talk it out, and then just refer to that and point people to that from now on when they ask. And then,
what are your night games, if I can ask?
Let me see. I will bring it up here for you. Because NBC, there's not a lot of great options for them for Ohio State based on, and I don't have what everybody else was, the other games that were going on right now with this list, but the night games I have Marshall, just because that's one of those just because night games on NBC, and Ohio State at Penn State, NBC. And boy, that's it. That might not be enough now that I look at it, but that's what we came up with. And from what it sounds like, Fox may have had the first 3 picks of weeks, and the thought would be that they would take Ohio State, Michigan number 1, and then Texas, Michigan, and then Alabama, Wisconsin,
Alabama,
which would leave. And then if Penn State ends up on NBC, Ohio State, Penn State ends up on NBC, I think that would be the 4th game selected. So then CBS would have the 5th pick, and who knows what that would be. But 2 games, 2 night games seems kind of low now that I think about it. But maybe Purdue at Ohio State is a night game rather than a 12 p.m. BTN. Maybe it's a night game BTN, something like that. But it's all well reasoned. It's not accurate, but we thought it out.
Yeah, it'll be interesting.
Seems like at least my audience is coming around to the fact that because anytime they think big games and they want predictions on whether they're going to be day or night games or where they're going to be, they think prime time. But they're going to be on. No, they're going to be on the big noon kickoff. It's going to be the destination for most of them. Look at Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State the last 5 years.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I hate the noon games. You're rushing around to get to the stadium. Sucks.
All right, guys. We appreciate you making this happen as always for another edition. Tony Gerdeman, Buckeye Weekly's the podcast, BuckeyeHuddle.com. Steve Hellwagon at Bucknuts 247 Sports. Guys, we'll see you back here next week. Appreciate it.
All right.